Welcome to the Deep Dive. You know we love to get our hands dirty with original sources, and today we're diving deep into the world of ancient Greek philosophy.
Oh, yeah, some really cool stuff.
And specifically, we're going to be looking at two concepts that are absolutely central to how the Greeks thought about knowledge and skill: episteme and techne.
I think most people listening probably know them better as knowledge and craft.
Yeah, and I think what's so cool is how these terms can really help us dig into those ancient texts. So we've got quite the lineup today.
We do.
We're going to be looking at texts from Xenophon, Plato, Aristotle, the Stoics.
Yeah.
We'll even be taking a peek into the mind of Plotinus.
Should be a fun ride.
It should.
Yeah.
So really what we're going to be exploring in this deep dive is how these thinkers saw the connection between knowing something that's like the episteme side of things
Right.
and actually doing something in the world which is more on that techne side.
And it's remarkable how these ideas that the Greeks were grappling with thousands of years ago are still so relevant to us today. I mean, we're still trying to figure out what it means to know something,
Totally.
what it means to have a skill,
Yeah.
and how those things come together to shape our lives. So I think taking a look back at these ancient perspectives can offer us some really surprising insights, maybe even challenge some of our modern assumptions.
Yeah, definitely. Well, why don't we kick things off with Xenophon? He was a student of Socrates, right?
He was.
And it seems like he had a pretty practical take on knowledge.
Oh, absolutely. You know, one of the things that's so fascinating about Xenophon is how closely he links episteme and techne. I mean, for him, they're almost interchangeable. They both really emphasize this idea of knowing how to do something.
Okay.
So it's less about abstract theories and more about having that ability to actually apply knowledge in the real world.
You know, you mentioned that Xenophon portrays Socrates as being way more focused on human affairs. Can you say more about that?
Yeah, so in Xenophon's writings, Socrates isn't really that interested in the abstract workings of the universe,
Right.
like those big cosmological questions. He's much more focused on understanding things that have a direct impact on how people live their lives.
Okay.
So things like ethics, politics, justice. Those are the issues that really matter to Xenophon Socrates.
So less about contemplating the stars and more about like understanding how to live a good life and be a responsible citizen.
Exactly. And for Xenophon, you don't just passively acquire this kind of understanding.
Right.
He really stresses the importance of diligence,
Okay.
training, practice. It's about honing your skills, just like a craftsman would.
It's like that idea of, practice makes perfect.
Yeah,
It's not enough to
Yeah.
just have the knowledge in your head.
right.
You have to actually put it into practice.
Exactly.
And I know he uses some pretty compelling examples in his writing to illustrate this point.
Oh, he does.
Like in the memorabilia, he has Socrates comparing understanding justice to knowing the alphabet.
Right.
It's like it's a skill, it's not just something that you're born with.
Something you develop.
Yeah, you develop it through practice and through application.
It's a great example, and it really highlights how Xenophon sees knowledge as something active and practical. It's something you build,
Yeah.
through consistent effort,
Yeah.
not just something that's, just passively sitting in your head.
Right.
You got to be able to use it.
And he actually extends that to leadership
Oh,
as well.
oh,
You
yeah.
have this analogy where he talks about, the ability to rule, like being a leader as a craft.
Yeah, the craft of leadership.
Yeah, and it's not just about, holding a certain position of power. It's about knowing how to use that power wisely, effectively.
It's about having the skills
Yeah.
to actually lead well.
And he even connects this to happiness, which is really interesting.
He does.
Like the idea that mastering the craft of leadership, just like mastering any craft, can lead to a more fulfilling life.
a flourishing life.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So for Xenophon, we're seeing this idea that knowledge is inherently practical.
Very much so.
And it's tied to action and skill development.
Yeah.
It's about doing something with what you know,
Mm-hmm.
whether it's leading a city or just understanding what it means to be a good person.
And it's interesting, too, how he even distinguishes between different types of crafts.
Oh, how...
He tends to favor those that benefit the community.
Okay.
So things like farming or warfare.
Okay.
And he sees those as more desirable than crafts that, might keep you kind of confined to a workshop,
Okay.
like pottery or shoemaking.
So it's about the scope of the impact of the craft on society.
Exactly. It's about how that craft contributes to the common good.
That's fascinating. So he's got like a whole vision for how knowledge should be used in the world
He does.
to actually improve lives and benefit others.
It's a very practical and community-oriented view.
Yeah, really interesting. Well, maybe we should shift gears a little bit and talk about Plato.
Okay.
He was also a student of Socrates, but he seems to bring his own unique spin to this whole idea of techne.
Oh, absolutely. Plato brings techne right into the heart of his philosophy, but he expands on it in some really interesting ways. He uses all sorts of examples, medicine, carpentry, even politics,
Right.
to illustrate these really complex philosophical ideas.
And I know he had this idea of ergon,
He did.
which is like the specific function or goal of a craft.
Yes.
Can you unpack that a little bit?
Sure. So for Plato, every techne has a specific ergon. It's the goal that's achieved through the practice of that craft. So for example, the ergon of medicine is to restore health. The ergon of carpentry is to build sturdy structures. But Plato doesn't stop there. He emphasizes that it's not enough to just know what the ergon is.
Okay.
You have to understand why a craft aims for that particular goal. And you have to be able to articulate that rationale clearly.
So it's not just about blindly following steps or techniques.
Right.
It's about understanding the principles behind those actions.
Exactly. A true craftsman, for Plato, isn't just someone who's skilled with their hands. They also possess this deep understanding of their craft's purpose. It's a combination of practical skill and intellectual understanding.
Right. So it's like the difference between a doctor who can just prescribe a medication and a doctor who can explain the reasoning behind the treatment.
A perfect analogy. For Plato, that deeper understanding is crucial.
But Plato also introduces this whole concept of forms, right?
He did.
These perfect, abstract entities that exist beyond our physical world.
Mm-hmm.
And it seems like that adds a whole other dimension to episteme.
It does. It's a really crucial point. With the forms, Plato's opening the door to a form of knowledge that goes beyond just practical skills. It transcends the practical realm. This knowledge of the forms, it becomes valuable in itself.
Okay.
It's about grasping these eternal, unchanging truths.
So it's more contemplative, more theoretical.
Yes, and it might not even have any immediate practical application. It's about understanding the true nature of things.
So for Plato, techne needs a clear goal, a deep understanding of that goal, and then you have to be able to explain it. But then with the forms, he introduces this whole other type of knowledge that seems way more theoretical, maybe even detached from practical concerns.
Yes, and this tension between the practical and the theoretical, this is something that his student Aristotle is really going to grapple with.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
Get into that in a bit, but
This is so insightful already. It's amazing to me how these ancient thinkers were already wrestling with all these complex ideas about knowledge and craft.
it really is remarkable, and we'll see how their insights continue to resonate even today as we delve deeper into these texts.
I can't wait to hear more. But first, I think it's time for us to take a quick break.
So we've got Xenophon with this super practical take on episteme and techne.
Right, almost like they're the same thing for him.
Exactly, yeah.
Right.
And then Plato starts to pull them apart a little with those forms. But then we get to Aristotle, right? And he really wants to get things clear, super clear about the relationship between episteme and techne. In fact, in his Nicomachean Ethics, he kind of lays down the law and separates them.
Interesting. So we're seeing like a progression here.
I think so.
Yeah.
Like each thinker is building on the ideas that came before, but also adding their own unique spin to it.
I like that. Okay, so Aristotle separates them. What's his reasoning?
Well, for him, episteme is all about necessary truths, those unchanging eternal principles, kind of like what you find in math. It's knowledge about things that just can't be otherwise.
So like 2 + 2 = 4. That will always be true no matter what.
Exactly. No matter what universe you're in, 2 + 2 will always equal 4. That's episteme for Aristotle. But techne, on the other hand, that deals with what he calls contingent realities.
Contingent realities. So stuff that could be different.
Yeah. Things that depend on specific circumstances, And techne is focused on producing something, bringing something new into the world.
So like building a house.
Yeah.
That's techne.
A house is a great example because a house could have been designed differently. It could have been built with different materials. Heck, it might not have been built at all. It's not an absolute truth the way that, like, the Pythagorean theorem is.
I see. It's contingent on a bunch of different factors.
Exactly. And Aristotle really drives this point home by connecting techne to the idea of poiesis.
Poiesis. What's that?
It basically means making or producing. It's all about creating something separate, something new. So think of it like the house or a sculpture or a piece of furniture.
Okay, so things that are made by a craftsperson, someone with techne.
You got it. tangible things that exist in the world because of someone's skill and knowledge. But here's the thing, and this always trips people up.
Oh, what is it?
Well, Aristotle also refers to medicine as both episteme and techne.
Wait, hold on. How does that fit into his system? I thought he separated them.
It's a great question, and trust me, scholars have been debating this for centuries. But it seems like there's this kind of secondary sense of episteme that Aristotle is working with here.
A secondary sense. I'm intrigued. Tell me more.
It's still knowledge, right? But it deals with the regularities that we observe in nature. So these are things that usually happen, but maybe not with the absolute certainty of, say, mathematical principles.
Okay, I think I'm starting to get it. So you're saying there's a difference between the absolute truth of, let's say, 2 + 2 = 4, and the truth of something like antibiotics usually cure an infection.
You're right on the money. With medicine, there are always exceptions, weird cases, unforeseen factors that influence the outcome. It's not always a guaranteed result.
So even if a doctor has the best technique in the world, they apply their skills perfectly, they still might not get the results they want because of these unpredictable elements.
Exactly. And Aristotle was really sharp about picking up on that. He recognizes that chance, pure luck, can play a role in how effective techne is in a way it can't with episteme in the strict mathematical sense.
Fascinating. I never thought about it like that before.
It really highlights how complex these ideas can be. But you know what's even cooler? Aristotle gives this really interesting example of how knowledge and skill play out in medicine. He says a doctor's understanding of health. Remember that ergon we were talking about before?
Oh yeah, like the goal.
Well, he says that understanding of health, of what it means to be healthy, that guides every single step the doctor takes when they're diagnosing and treating a patient.
So it's not just about blindly following some procedures, right?
Yeah.
The doctor is using their knowledge of the goal, the ergon, to make judgments in a really specific and unpredictable situation.
You're getting it. They're constantly adapting, making decisions based on that individual patient and what's going on in that moment. And this is where practical wisdom, what the Greeks call phronesis, comes in. That becomes the guiding force behind applying techne.
So even though Aristotle is working with this secondary sense of episteme, it seems like he's still moving towards a clearer distinction between, like, theoretical knowledge and practical know-how, much more than we saw with Xenophon.
I think you're right. He wants us to understand that these two realms of knowledge work in different ways. You use different types of reasoning depending on what you're dealing with. And this sets the stage for the Stoics. You're going to come along with a whole new way of thinking about the relationship between episteme and techne.
Oh, I'm ready for the Stoics. They're known for being all about virtue and living in accordance with nature.
And they connect episteme and techne to both of those things in a really interesting way. For the Stoics, virtue itself is a kind of techne.
Wait, are you saying that being a good person is like mastering a craft?
That's exactly what they're saying. It's about practicing, honing your skills so you can live a good life. But it takes more than just practice. You also need a deep understanding of the universe. And that understanding is what they connect to episteme.
So to be a virtuous person, you need both the practical skills and a solid theoretical grasp of how things work.
You nail it. They go even further and say that reason itself is like a craftsman.
Whoa, reason is a craftsman. How does that work?
Well, they see reason as this force that shapes our impulses, our desires. It guides them towards what's truly beneficial, towards the good.
So instead of just being ruled by our emotions and passions, we can use reason to steer our actions based on what we know is right, what's in line with the natural order.
Exactly. And for the Stoics, that alignment with reason and nature, that's the key to being virtuous. They even went so far as to say that virtue is a kind of knowledge, a kind of episteme in its unshakable certainty.
Wow, so knowledge is the basis for ethical living.
Mm.
That's heavy stuff. What about their idea of the unity of virtues? What's that all about?
That's where practical wisdom, phronesis, comes in. For the Stoics, phronesis is like the master skill, and all the other virtues, justice, courage, moderation, they're just different expressions of it, different ways that phronesis shows up in the world.
That's a really cool way to think about it. So it's like having a really versatile tool that you can use in all sorts of situations.
I like that. And you know, Cicero, the Roman Stoic, sums this up beautifully. He calls prudence, which is basically phronesis, he calls it the art of living. He even compares it to other crafts like medicine or navigation, emphasizing the skill and knowledge you need to live a good life.
So for the Stoics, it's all connected, right? Virtue, knowledge, and even craft. They're all part of this system for living well. But what about the flip side of that? Like, is there ever a danger in emphasizing knowledge too much? Do any of these philosophers talk about that?
They do, and that's a perfect segue to Alexander of Ephrodisius, who had some very interesting thoughts on what happens when you start prioritizing pure knowledge over action in the world. So we've gone from Xenophon, who sees episteme and techne as basically the same thing.
Right, very practically focused.
Yeah, very practical. And then Plato starts to complicate things with the forms.
Bringing in that theoretical element.
Right, exactly. Then Aristotle tries to clarify things, by drawing those distinctions between episteme and techne. But now we're getting to Alexander of Ephrodisius, and he's going to take this idea of pure knowledge to like a whole other level.
Okay, color me intrigued. What does he say?
Well, Alexander makes this argument for the superiority of pure knowledge, the kind of knowledge that's not tied down by like practical needs or concerns. It's knowledge for the sake of knowledge, like pure curiosity, a thirst for understanding.
I can definitely relate to that. It sounds almost like the ideal of a scholar, someone who's devoted to research and just deep thinking without necessarily trying to, solve real-world problems.
That's a great way to put it. He even connects this idea to the concept of homoiosis theo, becoming like God.
Whoa, okay, hold on. Becoming like God. How does pure knowledge get you there?
Well, Alexander's argument is that the gods, being perfect and self-sufficient, they don't need to act. They don't have to worry about practical stuff like us mortals do. They exist in this state of pure contemplation.
So by seeking out pure knowledge, we're kind of elevating ourselves, getting closer to that state of divine understanding, like transcending those limitations of our physical existence and engaging in a purely intellectual pursuit.
You got it. It's like we're trying to shed those earthly concerns and tap into something higher. And you know what else? He throws in this really cool concept called stochastic techne.
Stochastic techne. That's a mouthful. What's that all about?
It's basically getting at the fact that there's always an element of chance when it comes to practicing a craft, even if you're super skilled.
Oh, I see. So even the best craftsperson can't completely control the outcome. There are always variables, things you can't account for.
Right, and that's where Alexander really highlights the difference between the reliability of like pure theoretical knowledge and the uncertainty of actually applying it. Like theoretical knowledge in its purest form, that's unchanging, absolute.
Right, like those mathematical truths we were talking about before.
Exactly. But the second you try to apply it, put it into practice in the real world, well, that's when things get messy. You open the door to error and all those unpredictable outcomes.
Makes sense. So Alexander's really pushing for this idea of knowledge for its own sake, right? Expanding our understanding, even if it doesn't have any immediate practical use. But where does that leave techne in all of this?
Well, that's where Plotinus enters the scene. Remember him? The Neoplatonist.
Oh, yeah. Wasn't he big on mystical stuff?
He was, and he takes this whole separation of knowledge and craft even further. For Plotinus, true episteme, that represents a direct, non-discursive grasp of reality. Like it's akin to that state of divine nous that we talked about, a profound, intuitive understanding.
So it's more about mystical insight than like systematically gathering information.
Yeah, more like a direct experience and intuitive knowing. And in this view, techne, which is all about the material world, those practical applications, it's seen as almost limited.
Limited. How so?
Well, he calls it childish in comparison to true episteme. He sees it as this mere imitation of nature, stuck in the constraints of the physical world.
Wow, that's quite a fall from grace for techne, going from practically interchangeable with epistemes and Xenophon to almost irrelevant for Plotinus.
It really shows you how drastically different these views can be. Plotinus is firmly in the camp of contemplation. He believes that pure thought, the pursuit of episteme, that's what holds true power, a power that goes way beyond anything techne can achieve. It's about aligning with that divine nous and tapping into a whole other level of understanding.
So for Plotinus, just sitting and thinking, pure contemplation, that's ultimately more transformative than any practical school you could develop.
It's more about connecting with a higher realm of knowledge, the kind that transcends the limits of our material world. But he does acknowledge that there are some crafts that can, hint at this higher realm. Things like music. He says they're capable of grasping these intelligible proportions and harmonies that reflect the order and beauty of the universe.
So there's a little bit of redemption for techne there, Even in Plotinus's view, it could still give us a glimpse into something bigger.
Yeah, a little glimpse. I think what's so cool about all of this is that we started with the simple question,
Right.
how do you explain these concepts to a philosopher?
Sure.
And look where we've ended up.
I know, it's like we went on this wild philosophical journey from the very practical applications of Techne to the transformative power of episteme. And now I'm sitting here thinking, maybe knowledge is both, right? It's a tool for navigating the world, and it's a pathway to deeper understanding.
And that's the beauty of these ancient Greek thinkers. They might not always agree, but they force us to really grapple with these big questions. They remind us that knowledge is this multifaceted, powerful thing. And whether we're learning a practical skill or pondering the mysteries of the universe or just trying to be better humans, the pursuit of knowledge is a journey worth taking. It's a journey that can enrich our lives in ways we never even imagined.
Couldn't have said it better myself. And on that note, I think we're going to wrap up this deep dive. But hey, maybe this is just the beginning of your own philosophical journey. So go out there, explore these ideas, and see where they take you. Until next time, keep diving.